Hi everybody, hope you're safe and well. This is video 5.3 in our series of videos about chords. So we're fifth week going into sixth week now, and we've entered this world of chords. The class is going to contain really a half and half dose of notes and tablature, converting notes back and forth to your fretboard in the musical staff, and chord diagrams and how to use them, memorizing the most basic chords that guitar players use. So in this series so far, we've kind of introduced the idea of chords, melody, the singer's part, one note at a time, harmony, stacks of notes, the more supportive or accompanying role in music. And the guitar is often in that accompanying role and supporting a person who's singing, or a tune that's being sung, or an instrument that's playing the melody. The guitar, of course, we know can play a melody too, and sometimes does both at the same time. So we, in the last video, talked about the introduction to a chord, and the biggest rule so far we need to know is that when we're playing a chord off of our list in this class, the lowest tone is the root. So if I'm playing a G chord, the low G on the 6th string, and I'm referring to the natural scale that you all should have memorized by this point, the 6th string on the 3rd fret, that's going to be my bass note for a G chord. So again, very important that we know this natural scale, not just for reading notes, but now assembling chords and knowing that we're holding down the right notes. I don't ask you to spell chords in this class, and Disler makes kind of a veiled reference to chord theory without ever really getting into it in depth. I will say this, that a chord does have 3 elements or 3 intervals in it. You have a root note, which again for us will always be the lowest tone. It may be doubled in the chord. We have a chance that the note may appear somewhere else on a different string. If I'm playing a C chord, there may be more than just the low C. I have a third, 3 notes above the root. If it's a C chord, C, D, E would be the 3rd note. And that note actually is the one that determines the major or minor, the happy or sad sound. And again, I'm not going to get too in depth with that, just the components right now. So I have a root, a 3rd, and a 5th. C, D, E, F, and G would be the 5th. So if I played a C chord on the guitar, according to the sheet there, I would have 5 notes, more than 3, but in this case, 1, C, 3, E, and 5, G are all in successive order. And again, you can hear singers doing this. There's the next highest root. That should be a familiar musical sound to your ear. I will say this right off the bat, that the notes often on the guitar are mixed up. They're not in order as pretty or as clear as they are in a C chord right there. I don't mean all chords are not pretty, but sometimes they're mixed up. So don't expect the chords to be just laid out in 1, 3, 5 on the guitar. The voicing, as we call it, is often mixed up. But the little crash course there that I'll build on is that a chord has a root, a chord has a 3rd, and a chord has a 5th. Okay, we can kind of put that aside, and let's think more about shapes and rules right now to playing the chords. So if I start to think of the rules, Disler does a neat job of categorizing them by saying that some chords use the open strings in the bass of the chord as the root. So 6, 5, and 4 are my bass strings, which means I have an open E as the bass note on any E chord that I play. If I play E, E minor, or E7, which are the 3 E chords on this list, I have 3 E chords going across there. They all use the 6th string in the bass. If I have an A chord, well then that follows that I would have the open A string in the bass. So for this row across the top, if I bring it in close, you can see the 5th string is in the bass for each one of these chords. There's an open 0 in the bass. They all have the root A in the bass. And then that follows for the D chords too. So this is a neat rule to remember. If I'm playing any chord that I have memorized the open string for, all 3 of the D chords use the 4th string D in the bass. So there's 9 chords off the list of 15 that we've already memorized where the root is at. All the E chords use open E, all the A chords use open A, all the D chords use open D. And then if we, again, just kind of follow to the next category, we'd have to say that any other chord has to have a fretted bass note. I mentioned G, G or G7. That would use the 3rd fret G on the 6th string in the bass. And for the G7 chord, I'm using my 3rd finger. For the G chord, I'm using my middle finger. The C chord on the A string, A, B, C, has a C in the bass. A B7 chord, which is on the list, has a B on the A string. F, if it's played as a bigger bar chord, which neither book shows us, again, it's considered a more intermediate and not beginner technique, F uses the F on the D string in the bass. So that's the only one that doesn't use the lowest possible bass note. That low F is not in the bass, but the D string F is in the bass. So that's the one to watch out for. That one also requires a little bar. Again, I'll go through each individual chord in the next video and talk about the fingerings for each one. So that's the categorization I want you to think of. Open strings in the bass or fretted notes in the bass, okay? If it's an E, A, or D, it's going to use an open string, 6, 5, or 4. If it's a G chord, it'll be the lowest G possible. If it's a B chord, lowest B possible. C, lowest C possible. And F, the middle F will be the bass note for that chord. Just to make it a little easier to play, we don't use the low F. So that is the 2 basic categories that follow our list. She does in Disler chapter 5 give one more category that talks about using a different note in the bass. She points out that sometimes an easy version of a chord is given where, like the F chord I was just mentioning, a fingering is modified a little bit in order to make it more playable. This is true, and but not the only reason that we would use a different note in the bass. There's something called an inversion. An inversion is when a note is in the bass, another chord tone, a 3rd or a 5th, is in the bass, and it could be others along the, again, the theory road, down the road, but the 3rd or the 5th might be used in the bass, and that is a slash chord. If you see something that says G/B, that means it's a G chord with B in the bass. Okay, we won't have any chords like that in this class, but you will certainly encounter them as soon as you start to try and play popular songs or folk songs or anything really on the guitar down the road as it gets into that intermediate level. So that 3rd category could be it's an easier chord to play without the root in the bass, or it is an inversion and it needs the sound of a different note in the bass. Oftentimes when we're trying to play something off of a recording, we may have to do a inversion in order to make it sound correct. So again, we'll put that aside and we'll stick with our 2 categories of the root being an open string or the root being a fretted note. Okay, and after Disler introduces that in chapter 5, it gets into beginning chord exercises, and there are a series of chords that need to be played in succession. So before I get into that, I want to just mention one other aspect that kind of came through in the first video when I was talking about Hal Leonard introduction of chords. And that is, there are some elements that I need to be able to see on the music in order to play the chords. So before I get into the individual chords and chord exercises, we could just again reiterate a couple of rules here. I need to know some things when I'm going to play chords on the guitar, and there's really 3 elements here, and this will come up in the chapter and in the chapters to follow. I need to know what is the time signature. So in other words, how many beats How many beats are there in a group or in a measure? Which brings the second element, measure lines. How many groups of that time signature indicated beat do I repeat? So is it 2 measures of C? Is it 4 measures of C? Is it 8 measures of C? That will help me organize how many times I'm going to strum or the pattern I'm going to strum in. So I have time signature giving me the number of beats in a measure, and then the number of measures that tells me how many of those units I'm going to play. And the third element would be, what chord am I going to play? A chord symbol. So these are the things that I need to make a shorthand that we call a chord chart in the music world. And bass players, guitar players, piano players, or keyboard players, we use chord charts. And in the musical world, melodic players also understand chord charts too, and can solo and use them to guide them for improvisation and things like that as well. But I use chord charts all the time for years now. If I'm teaching a band a song, or a friend a song, or if I'm writing a song and I have a mapped out chord chart, we can get to the music right away, and a bass player can play the correct bass note for the correct number of measures. The keyboard player, if they know their chords, can just look at the chord chart and play their chords. And a guitar player, same thing. I can see a G chord, a C chord, a D chord, and how many measures I have to play. So there's 3 elements there that we see in the chords written above music in the Hal Leonard book, but also they can be written just on their own, and we'll see that in the Disler book as well. So I'm going to end this video here. Again, what we covered was the root is the lowest tone when I strum. That could be an open string or a fretted note for our purposes right now. And that the lowest note, like we said, we always play the root as the lowest tone. Those 2 categories are there, and then we have elements of a simple chord chart, which are, do I have a time signature, do I have a number of measures, and do I have the chord name in order to play all of those elements. Okay guys, we'll end there, and in the next video I'll get into individual chords and the technique of playing chords. Have a great day.